Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this virtual Sunday morning meeting from Conscious Living. I trust everyone is well and, more importantly, virus-free. It's both a pleasure and a privilege to have the opportunity to talk with you today, although that being said, I have to confess I'm a little apprehensive about using and delivering this talk on Streamline and Facebook Live. For those of you who know me, you recall I'm always a little nervous when I give a talk at the centre, and using Facebook Live is even more daunting, however. Given the fact I will be blind to any visual feedback from the audience, and be it positive or negative, but you can send comments, which I won't be able to read. My multitasking abilities are quite limited. So I ask your patience, and hopefully I can deliver the talk with the key message being clearly understood and manage to navigate the program and supporting slides without too many hiccups. As always, we'll start the meeting. Let me just get the next slide up here. Bear with me a second. All right. Okay, so we're going to start our meeting with our usual customary opening reading. And I've chosen the message by Emmanuel from the book, The Way, the Truth, and the Life, chapter 8, entitled Jesus Came, as it really, I think, sets the stage for my talk today. And Emmanuel's message starts with a quotation by Paul from the book of the Philippians, chapter 2, verse 7, when he stated, "But he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, making himself similar to men." Many disciples talk about how terribly hard it is to do good works in the service of evangelical fellowship. They complain about the unfortunate state of ignorance that most people seem to enjoy. However, complaints like this are unjustified. Carrying out his divine wisdom of love, Jesus did not depend on the immediate collaboration of perfected and wise spirits. Instead, he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, making himself similar to men. We are not able to go up to the Saviour to be with him in his sublime position. Instead, he came down to us, temporarily extinguishing his aureole light in order to benefit us without displays of sensationalism. Jesus' example in this particular is a highly profound lesson. Let no one allege intellectual or sentimental accomplishment as the reason for their brothers and sisters misunderstanding them. None of those who have walked the earth ever reached the heights of Christ. On the other hand, we see him eating with sinners, talking fraternally to prostitutes, and giving his final example between two thieves. If your neighbor cannot reach your spiritual level, then you can go down to his or hers for the work of fraternity or enlightenment, without any ostentation that might be offensive. Remember the example of the Divine Master. In order to come to us, he emptied himself, entering the world as a child with no cradle, and exiting his glorious endeavor as a crucified servant. So again, let me just get back to my place here. Okay. And so with this inspiring message of Emmanuel, I'd like to invite you all to join me in an opening prayer. And so at this time, I ask you all to put aside our thoughts and concerns of the current challenges we are all experiencing. Let us calm our minds, and we ask that each and every one of us connects with our benevolent spirits and guardian angels, asking our dear Creator, our brother Jesus, and all the benevolent spirits that are with us in each of our individual homes. Although we're physically separated, we are one family, united together in the same beliefs and the same desire to learn. We ask that the benevolent spirits be with us this next hour, helping us absorb the teachings with an open heart and an open mind, but more importantly, putting those teachings into practices in the day ahead. Again, we're so grateful for this opportunity, and so be it. Okay, so the topic I was given today is entitled Spiritual Assistance. And there are so many ways this subject can be explored and interpreted. Of course, we're all immortal spirits, either incarnate or discarnate. And the true purpose of our existence is to assist other spirits and thus, in the greater scheme of things, contribute to the overall creation. In my last talk at the centre I gave in early February, I shared my thoughts and reflections on the importance of relationships. Let me just go to this next slide here. The core of my talk was based on the third part of the Spirit's book, specifically chapter 7, regarding the law of society. In this chapter, Kardec explores with the benevolent spirits the need for societal life and the importance of how incarnate spirits like us must help one another. Specifically, in answer to question 767, the spirits clearly tell us that people, let's get my slide working here, apologies. People instinctively seek out societal living because all of us must cooperate in humankind's progress, and we cannot do by mutually helping one another. And he adds that humans must progress, they cannot do so alone. And finally, at the end of the chapter, Kardec has his own comments, saying, no single individual possesses the complete range of faculties. It is through societal union that individuals complete one another in order to ensure their welfare and progress. It is because they need one another they're being created to live in society and not in isolation. Thus, the objective of incarnate existence is to grow intellectually and morally, and this can be best achieved by either accepting the spiritual assistance of others, of those more advanced, or by giving and serving assistance to those less evolved. With the current coronavirus, never has the importance of spiritual assistance, whether helping our own family and close friends, our local community, even the larger state and nation, or indeed the whole globe. Never in the history of the human race have we faced such a need for cooperation. When I gave my last talk at the centre in early February, the US had just recorded its first corona death. Today, 3 months later, the world has suffered almost 3.5 million known infected cases and almost a 250,000 deaths worldwide. And these numbers are likely to be underestimates, and they're still growing. But I'll return to this aspect of spiritual assistance and just how we incarnate beings are learning to help each other during this time of crisis. I'll come back to that at the end of my talk. But the principal focus of my talk today will be to explore the assistance we incarnate spirits receive from the high order spirits, and specifically the role of the purest spirit ever to incarnate on planet Earth, and that, of course, is Jesus. As the main source of material, I'll use the amazing book, On the Way to the Light, dictated by the Spirit Emmanuel through Chico Xavier. And I'll also cite other relevant passages from the books of Kardec, including material from posthumous works. On the back cover of the book, The Way to Light, the contents of the book are summarized as followed. Those who are trying to understand our world and its origins will find answers in this book. Of all the events, facts, situations, and individuals that have down through time have marked our progress, the author highlights the most relevant and presents them in this notable work of historic synthesis. He analyzes the missions of spirits such as Krishna, Buddha, Abraham, Moses, Fulhi, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Solomon, Socrates, Plato, the Hebrew prophets, the apostles, Paul of Tarsus, Saint Francis of Assisi, Luther, and Allan Kardec. The book narrates the history of civilization from the perspective of Spiritism, showing the true position of the gospel of Christ in the light of us religions and philosophies. It addresses the first inhabitants of the earth, touching on the historical pages of peoples, great empires, and the changes that followed one another in the direction of the future. Emmanuel shows us that through divine determinism, we are all on the way to the light. You know, when I first read this book maybe 3 years ago, I was a little skeptical, partly because I'm still very much grounded in science and evolution according to Darwin and so forth. And my first erroneous, as I now realize, impression was the book was trying to contradict. It's almost as if Jesus was there behind the scenes creating the evolutionary path. And that is not so. And we'll later go back to the comparison between the science and what we know from Spiritism and the current science. So throughout the book, Emmanuel explains the loving assistance of Jesus, governor of the planet, and how he, through his actions and through the spiritual messengers he sent us, helped guide the formation and subsequent evolution of life on planet Earth. I think I've just skipped a slide here. Let me go back. Yeah. Emmanuel refers to Jesus as the divine sculptor, using his divine work as he put the chisel of his mercy to the block of unshaped matter. He established the rules for us physical phenomenon. Science has replaced his providence with the word nature in all of its studies and analysis of existence. Nevertheless, his love was the word of the creation in the beginning, just as it is and will be in the glorious crown of terrestrial beings in immortality without end. Beautiful, beautiful words. The book starts by explaining there's a community of pure spirits made up of perfected, angelic being of which Jesus is one of the divine members. And they've met in the vicinity of the earth on only 2 occasions, okay? 2 occasions. The first was at the formation of the solar system some 4.6 billion years ago. The second occurred when Jesus coming to earth was decided in order to bring the immortal lessons of the gospel and love and redemption to the human family. So during this vast expanse of time, Jesus, the governor of the earth, was instrumental in shaping the evolution of life in all its varied forms, from the unicellular bacteria to multicellular life forms which, in the oceans of the earth, started to use sunlight in the process of photosynthesis. This led in turn to the buildup of oxygen in the atmosphere, and during successive climatic and tectonic changes, land in the form of the continents appeared. Life began to migrate from the oceans to the dry land, first in the form of the plants and subsequently that of the animal kingdom. So in that one paragraph, that sums up what really happened in 4.5 billion years. And it's very difficult to comprehend such expanses of time. But to help us better understand, let us imagine the formation of the planet Earth started just after midnight on New Year's Day. And now the moment we're living in now is midnight on December the 31st. So the lifetime of the planet is represented by a period of 1 year. So when we go back to these major milestones, we can say that the lifetime is represented by 1 year. The first life first appeared in the form of simple bacteria in mid-February, multicellular life in June, land plants in mid-September, and land animals in early November. The dinosaurs became extinct in 65 million years ago in late November. And the slit between apes and what would become the hominids, the ancestors of modern humans, only occurred about 12 hours ago. 12 hours ago. So it really puts into perspective all this time that Jesus has been perfecting this planet. Our ancestors only appeared just 12 hours ago. Now, exactly when the human race started on Earth is difficult to pinpoint. Scientific records are limited from limited fossils, and more recently DNA tracing shows the first wave of Homo sapiens were formed about 180,000 years ago. That represents only 8 minutes in our time scale. These early humans started to migrate out of Africa, but either subsequently returned or changed form in the different climatic conditions, ultimately became extinct. Here we talk about Homo erectus and Neanderthals and so on. But then the second wave of human migration started only about 70,000 years ago. Now we're talking 8 minutes when Homo sapiens appeared. And it's from these early humans, numbering perhaps as little as 10,000 individuals. The whole of today's 7.8 million inhabitants can be traced. That is a phenomenal fact when you look at it. Again, in these last 8 minutes, we've got to from 10,000 to 7.8 billion. So how does all this scientific evidence stack up against the Spiritist literature? And I'm going to turn now to Kardec in Genesis, Miracles and Predictions, and he sheds a lot of light on this subject in chapter 11, Spiritual Genesis. In this chapter, he makes an hypothesis, and at that time he says hypothesis. And he said the bodies of apes could well have served as garments for the first human spirits, who were necessarily a little advanced for in the incarnation on earth. These garments were more appropriate for their needs and more adequate for the exercise of their faculties than the body of any other animal. And later he adds, whoops, I'm going backwards, let me go forward. Excuse me a second. All right. In accepting this hypothesis, one could say that under the influence and by the effect of the intellectual activity of the new inhabitant, the envelope became modified and embellished in its details while retaining the general form of the whole. In procreating, these improved bodies reproduce, displaying the same changes, much as what occurs with grafted trees. They gave origin to a new species that gradually pulled away from the primitive type as the spirit progressed. Now, it's important to remember that Genesis was published for 1867. That was 8 years after Charles Darwin's major work on the origin of species. However, it was in 1871, in other words, 4 years after Genesis, that Darwin published the second major work, The Descent of Man, in which he proposed that the human race had originated and originally separated from our closest relatives, the chimpanzees and bonobos. So, again, it fit together. What is interesting, the point that Kardec made here, is once the human body, the organic form, has developed such a state where we can start to receive spirits. So these 10,000, as they increase in number, start to receive spirits from outside, from other planets, with a greater level of intelligence. They start to modify the body. And we'll come back a bit more to about that, because that leads to the different races on planet Earth. And on the way to the light, Emmanuel brings chapter 2 with the ancestors of human beings. Let's see that. There we go. Under the guidance of the spiritual realm during the tertiary period, there were a few races of anthropoids in the lower Pliocene era. That's about 2.5 million years ago. And they were the ancestors of both human and modern day apes. And again, that fits in what we just learned from Genesis. And of course, from what Darwin was saying. And in the last part of the chapter, with the title, The Great Transition, the centuries stretched their awnings of pain-filled experiments over the heads of those creatures with elongated arms and hairy bodies until one day, the hosts of the unseen world performed a definitive transition in the pre-existing perispiritual body of primitive humans in the sidereal regions. This is, again, regions of the universe outside planet Earth. And at certain times in their reincarnation. The improved physical constitution of the first primates, thus the improved physical constitution of the first primitives appeared, tending towards the elegance of time to come. A visceral transformation had taken place in the structures of the ancestors of the human race. How could such a transition occur? Your scientific mind may ask, and particularly mine, as you know. Quite naturally. So in other words, what the spirits are telling us, there's no contradiction to the laws of nature. The only thing that science does not yet understand, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in detail later, is the impact of the spiritual part, the perispirit, and what that perispirit brings with it. So there's no apparent conflict between the Spiritist writings and Kardec and Emmanuel and the current scientific knowledge. This aligning of the teachings of Spiritism and evolutionary science is further supported by the works of André Louis in the book Evolution of Two Worlds. And that is a very complex book, but I think well worth the study if you're interested. So that being said, what Spiritism brings to the human evolutionary trajectory is the concept of the spiritual component. While science, particularly in the field of genetics over the last 20 years, better understands the role of the genetic code embodied in DNA. But what it has yet to discover is the influence of the spirit. It's as if the perispirit, the link between the spirit and the physical body, carries the intellectual moral DNA equivalent. Let me say it again. This is if the perispirit carries the intellectual and moral DNA equivalent. Just as DNA is in the organic, we have the perispirit that brings all this information from the past, bringing with it learnings of all the past experiences of previous incarnations. And again, I think this is one of the most fascinating areas of Spiritism as it relates to science. Okay, so let's return to the book On the Way to the Light. And in chapter 3, he talks about the Adamic races. And the manual describes how many thousands of years ago in the constellation of Auriga, located 42 light years from Earth, I got my, well, I'll carry on. Light years from Earth, there is a star named Capella. The inhabitants of the star were generally much more advanced than those on Earth. However, as Emmanuel explains, there were several millions of rebellious spirits living on the pathway to general evolution, making it difficult to consolidate the hard-earned gains of those people full of compassion and virtue. However, as an act of widespread cleansing would banish these rebellious spirits to faraway Earth, where they would learn to accomplish great conquests of the soul through pain and hard work in their new environment, while at the same time giving impetus to their less evolved brothers and sisters. So once again, we see the compassionate and loving spiritual assistance of Jesus, not only in strengthening the consciences of the spirits from Capella by fulfilling their duties of solidarity and love, but also providing a leap forward morally and intellectually. In addition, over numerous reincarnations, they started to develop the physical characteristics of what become the future traits of the human race. And what he says is that the spirits from Capella had, group, sects, or affinities to each other, and there are certain, as we know, affinities group like people together. So when they reincarnated on Earth, they started to congregate in various regions of the world, and this implication is what gives rise to the different races and the different physical attributes. We know that the Chinese physical outward look of the Chinese face is totally different than that from somebody from Sweden, that's somebody different from the Aborigines of Argentina. And really, science has never been able to explain that. I mean, there's a certain amount of science in genetics, the code, but some of these physical differences have never been able to explain. And what Kardec brings and what Emmanuel brings is that these immigration of spirits from Capella, grouping together in the various regions of the world, start to form the different races we still see today. And again, it implies the impact and the ability of the perispirit to interfere, not interfere, but to develop in certain traits the actual organic DNA of the body. And in reincarnations, these traits become part of the DNA. I think it's fascinating. Okay, so let me go on now we're going to skip forward a few thousand years, and we come to Egypt. And a particular mention is the Egyptian race who constructed the pyramids, which we all know about, and they battled engineering down through the centuries. However, it's not just the colossal size of the millions of tons of stone and just how they were physically constructed, but more the knowledge that lies within. According to the writings of Emmanuel, the pyramids reveal the most extraordinary knowledge to that group of studious spirits of the truth of life. In addition to that knowledge, the future course of earthly humankind is to be found there. Every measurement has a symbolic expression relative to the cosmogonic system of the planets and its position in the solar system. There lies the ideal meridian, which crosses more continents and fewer oceans, which one can use to calculate the extent of the lands that are inhabitable by humans, the approximate distance between the sun and the earth, the longitude traveled by the earth on its orbit in one day, the precision of equinoxes, as well as much other scientific knowledge that is only now being grasped by modern astronomy. So there's so many hidden messages in those pyramids, not just the we can be amazed about the size and how they were constructed, but there's so much information that was hidden in the dimensions and the alignment and so forth. And Emmanuel ends chapter 4 by stating, the loving assistance of Christ did not forsake the progress of that people filled with moral worthiness. He sent them his agents and his messengers, inspiring them in their accomplishment, which have traversed time and have stirred the admiration and respect of posterity of all centuries. And again, this is another example, and we have lots and lots of examples of how Christ sent these messengers to earth to help us advance. And I'm going to cite a couple of these messengers. The first one is Socrates. So we're going to fast forward another few thousand centuries to the 5th century BC. And in chapter 10, Ancient Greece and the Mission of Socrates, Emmanuel opens by saying, prior to his own coming into the world, the Christ appraised the spiritual maturity of human beings and sent a large cohort of wide and benevolent spirits who were capable of definitely consolidating the maturation of the earthly thought. So again, this is the next stage in our evolution, because our moral and intelligence had reached a stage that we were ready to receive more messages and more influence from the high order spirits who came down and reincarnated amongst us. So he goes on to say, just as the physical human organism acquired extensive experimentation in the realm of nature before the definitive biological characteristics were set, Jesus' teachings had represented a sure guideline for humankind's spiritual growth. It had to be preceded by wide experimentations or experiments in the societal area. And of course, Socrates was quite a revolutionary at his time. And the ideas that he projected were, in fact, not well received. But let's go to the introduction to the Gospel according to Spiritism, because in there, Kardec provides a very deep analysis of Socrates' writings. Actually, more accurately, it was Plato, because Socrates, like Jesus, did not leave any written record and left it to his disciples, principally Plato. So Kardec compares the 21 maxims of Socrates with the Gospel of Jesus and the key principles of Spiritism. And here I'm just going to pull out a few of them. First one, Socrates tells us that the human being is an incarnate soul. And again, for that time, that was quite an insight. The soul wanders and becomes confused when it enters the body. And same way, when it's immersed in the body, the corruption, it never possesses the truth. And we know from Spiritism that we need to dematerialize. We need to leave this body through multiple incarnations so that we become less and less connected to material. And as we go more and more towards the truth, we eventually reach the stage we can actually see God and understand God. He talks about daemons fill the space that separated the sky from the earth. Of course, daemons in that day did not mean demons. It meant just spiritual beings. Soul is immaterial. This one I like. One should never return injustice for injustice. And of course, this is contrary to what Moses said 1,000 years plus earlier. But it reflects that Jesus took up later about turning the other cheek. It is by fruit that a tree is known. Again, this is cause and effect in a way. This one I particularly like. The most beautiful prayers and the most beautiful sacrifice please the divinity less than a virtuous soul who put forth the effort to resemble it. So again, it's not what we say or the way we say it. It's really what we do. I like this one too. Right? I call depraved that commonplace lover who loves the body more than the soul. No, didn't say any more about that. And then finally, of course, there is wisdom in not believing that you know what you do not know. And that's one of the most famous writings of Plato, based on Socrates' teachings. So I want to move on now to, let me just go back a second before that slide. I'd like to share with one more example of spiritual assistance, and perhaps the most sublime example in the history of humankind. And that, of course, was the help that the spirits gave to Hippolyte Léon Desinard Rivail, excuse my French, but it's better known to us all as Allan Kardec. And I'm sure most of you who have been watching this talk will have seen the recently released film about Kardec. What struck me most about the film was his incredible perseverance and resilience to overcome the difficulties he encountered from so many fronts, not just professionally from his peers, but also his financial situation and sacrifice and his own personal health. But it no means belittles his ability to say that he also received limitless assistance from the spiritual realm. To illustrate this, I want to share two stories from his writing. The first is from the biography of Kardec, detailed in the introduction to the book of What is Spiritism. And the second is from the book Posthumous Works, soon to be published in English. So one night when Kardec was working on the first draft of the Spirits book, he started to hear raps coming from one of the walls, and he went to inspect the wall but found nothing abnormal. But every time he went back to work, the raps returned. And when his wife came back later, she too heard the noises, but together they were unable to discover the cause. Finally, he retired for the night. The next day, he attended a mediums meeting in the home of Monsieur Baudin, who was a close collaborator of Kardec. And Kardec started the meeting by explaining to the group the events of the previous night. And then when the medium started to receive a spirit, Kardec initiates a dialogue as follows. Okay. I've lost it here, but let me read it here. Question. You have heard the incident that I've just mentioned. Could you tell me what caused the raps which so insistently made themselves heard? It was your familiar spirit, was the response. Question. What was the purpose for knocking in this way? He wanted to communicate with you. So Kardec asks again, can you tell me what he wanted? And the spirit answers, you can ask him yourself. He's right here. So then Kardec questions, my familiar spirit, whoever you may be, I thank you for having visited me. Would you be so kind as to tell me who you are? And the answer came, for you, I shall call myself Truth. And for a quarter of an hour every month, I'll be here at your disposal. There is some discussion whether that spirit of truth is Jesus himself or just maybe a group of the high order spirits, but it certainly came from the high realm. And he only made himself available for 15 minutes. So find myself here. Anyway, during the ensuing conversation, the Spirit of Truth explained the reason for the rap was to alert Kardec of mistakes he had made in the writings that night. And sure enough, when Kardec got back home, he found the errors and inconsistencies in his writings, which he subsequently corrected. And during the next few months, the Spirit of Truth returned to the monthly meeting with Kardec as promised, but the encounter slowed down and finally ceased altogether. But there is one additional exchange that is documented in Posthumous Works that I'd like to share with you now, and it goes as follows. Kardec, you said you would be a guide who would help and watch over me. I conceive this protection and its objective with a certain order of things, but could you tell me if this protection also applies to the material things of life? And the Spirit of Truth answers, in this world, material life is part of it. Not helping you to live your life would be not would be like not helping, not loving you at all. And that is an absolute gem. I think that is beautiful. We often think of the spirits here to guide us spiritually and really with no concern of all the challenges we face each day. But I think here the Spirit of Truth recognizes and accepts that we have difficulties because we have these material constraints. And we need to bear that in mind. And when we have difficulties in this life, as we're going through now, we need to connect with our spirits, our guardian angels, and ask for help because they are willing and able to help us. And then I can just find it. I think, yeah, here we go. Kardec has just had one last comment here. The protection of that spirit whose superiority I was far from imagining, in fact, was never lacking. His solicitude and that of the good spirit who acted under his orders manifested in every circumstance of my life, whether soothing out my material problems, helping me carry out my endeavors, or saving me from the effects of the malevolence of my antagonists, who were always rendered powerless. If the tribulations inherent in my mission could not be avoided altogether, they were always at least mitigated and largely compensated my truly rewarding moral satisfaction. So, with that beautiful message from the Spirit of Truth, I hope I've been able to, in this short time, to give you some insight into limitless spiritual existence we all receive throughout our lives. I also hope I've been able to provide some insight into the wonderful book by Emmanuel and inspired you to read for yourselves. I have personally read it a number of times, but in preparing today's talk, I've gained a much deeper insight, understanding and appreciation of the compassion and loving hand of our Creator. Jesus has shaped our planet, humanity, and yet is alongside each and every one of us to help us guide us in our daily challenges of our incarnate existence. The first two chapters explain the origins of the solar system, planet Earth, the evolution of life, and consequently humankind. But as I said earlier in my talk, the concepts that are revealed are consistent with the current scientific knowledge. We now know that our planet is not the center of the solar system, but just one tiny pinprick in the vast and ever-expanding universe, where the number of stars and the distances between are just too staggering to comprehend. Like the telescope humbled us into insignificance, the microscope brought us insight into the world of the very tiny. The countless families of life forms of microorganisms living inside us that are essential, but sometimes detrimental to our existence as we currently now so aware. The microscope also led to the discovery of the components of matter itself, the molecules that we're all made of, the atoms, the subatomic particles, and the forces that govern them. Just like the telescope and the microscope that gave us understanding of the very big and the very small, someday, in the not too distant future, science will invent or discover what I like to call the spirit-scope, where mankind will discover empirical evidence of the immortal spirit and the spirit world, consciousness, and the symbiosis of the organic and spiritual body. Just as DNA brings us the blueprint of the physical component, science will understand the spiritual DNA, the moral and intellectual information based on previous lives, experiences, the use of free will, all stored up in the perispirit. But the book is much more. It provides an insight into the evolution of not just the human body, but of humankind. Helps us appreciate the origins of the differences between the peoples of the world, the physical traits, cultures, languages, and belief systems. But whatever these external differences may be, deep down inside us, we have a common understanding. It is that inside every one of us, perhaps buried in our subconscious, there is an understanding and a desire to do good. But the real message that Emmanuel brings is a deep appreciation of the compassion and love of the Creator. Through Jesus, the high order spirits, our guardian angels and protectors, we always have this spiritual assistance we need. We are never alone. We just need to learn to exercise our abilities and to tap into it. But finally, I'd like to end my talk with a few comments regarding the current pandemic of COVID-19. I'm sure all those watching today are feeling the anxiety caused by the virus, either from concerns of our own personal health or loved ones that are more vulnerable because of age or other factors. Perhaps some of us will personally know someone who is sick, hospitalized, or has even died from the virus, or has lost income and is uncertain how they will pay their bills or even put food on the table. But we need to put these fatalities rates in perspective. Here in the USA, approximately 750,000 deaths from all causes were recorded in the first quarter of this year. That's more than 10 times from the virus. 8 out of 10 deaths from the virus are adults, 65 or older. So after the pandemic is over, one would expect the death rate to actually reduce below normal due to the premature deaths of the elderly. From a historical perspective, it's estimated that between 75 to 200 million died from the Black Death in the 1350s. This represents approximately 20% of the world's population at that time, and a much higher percentage in major urban areas. The flu pandemic of 1918 resulted in 20 to 50 million deaths, and there have been many flu and cholera epidemics over the years that have killed millions. The most recent pandemic was due to AIDS virus, estimated to have killed over 36 million worldwide, with more than 30 million currently living with the disease, most of which live normal lives due to advances in medicine. So while comparing these past pandemics, it makes this one seem relatively trivial. It doesn't really alleviate current fears. But our rational minds present another perspective that offers solace in these troubling times. First, we know that although the virus is not made by humans, its propagation worldwide has been a direct result of modern-day global society and the habits of humankind. We also know science will find the cure. We're already finding better therapeutic treatments and discovering new effective antiviral drugs. Dozens of global medical teams are actively engaged in vaccine research, many of which are in the early stages of trials in humans. But also, and more importantly, as Spiritis, we recognize the virus not as a punishment by the Creator, but as an inevitable step in our spiritual evolution. It's all part of the master plan in the regeneration of planet Earth that was communicated by the spirits and documented by Kardec 160 years ago. And it will continue for many years to come with the emigration of wayward spirits and the immigration of more advanced spirits, just as occurred with the planet Capella thousands of years ago. The virus demonstrates the law of destruction in action, although in a relatively minor way. In answer to question 726 of the Spirits book, the Spirits tell us that it is necessary for everything to be destroyed in order to be reborn and regenerated. What you call destruction is no more than a transformation that is aimed at renewing and improving living beings. We already see evidence of this transformation. Everywhere we look, we see solidarity and charity, people reaching out and embracing others, not physically, of course, but connecting spiritually with acts of kindness. Family bonds, often so fragile in the past due to the pace and pressures of life's divergent responsibilities and habits, are being forced through the lockdown to re-examine the relationship, rediscover and rekindle their mutual affections and dependencies. With the newly discovered luxury-free time, we're invited to slow down and meditate on the most important aspects of our incarnate existence. Let us take this time to study in greater detail the Spiritist doctrine. In fact, all Kardec's books now are available, including What is Spiritism and the first 4 years of the Spiritist Review. They're all available on a website in PDF format. It's called the Spiritist Academy, that's one word, .com, spiritisacademy.com. All the texts can be downloaded, copied, pasted for future reference and study. And the site is actually also designed for those who are new to Spiritism with a creative series of animated videos. So help spread the word. Also, Emmanuel's book, if you're interested, is available for immediate download in the Kindle format or in the physical book with next day delivery for $15 on Amazon Prime. And finally, although the road to recovery will be slow, and arduous, the new global norm post-COVID-19 will never be the same as before. And I hope that's a good thing. Hopefully, humankind will push the reset button, critically re-examine the global financial drivers of consumption and our materialistic society. It is time to address the inequalities of the world and the depletion of its resources. Already, planet Earth is responding. Pollution has been visibly reduced. The air and seas are clearer, the sky bluer. Even the birds are singing louder. And so, on that optimistic note, I would like to ask you all to join me in our closing prayers. Okay, let's go here. So please join me in the closing prayer, asking everyone to reflect on the message that the spirits have brought us today. Let us see that this is a time of learning, of resetting our direction and our re-emphasizing what is our real purpose in life. We're so thankful for all the help we receive each and every day. And we need more and more each day to tap into these resources of spiritual assistance. They're abundant around us all. Please send your blessing to all those who are suffering, to all those who are in hospital, to those who have lost loved ones. Hopefully asking them to reflect and to look around them and find solace in serving others. This is the true purpose of this whole experience. We ask that you keep us safe the coming week. Be with us again here at our virtual center for another lesson and more learnings. Again, help us put our learnings and teachings into practice in the coming days. We're so grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much for your presence and your continual support. We thank you, and so be it. So I'd like to thank you all for your patience and wish you all a wonderful week. Just before I sign off, I'd just like to remind you that we have now a new gospel meeting that starts at 7:15 online. Go to meeting, there's information and the link on the website. 7:15 on every Wednesday. We had the first meeting last week. It's going to be organized and directed by a group of good spirits who we know as Andrea, Marcelo, Sue, and Angie. So I hope you can all join us. And then also just a reminder that we have a group that meets again virtually 9:30 on a Sunday morning. And you'd all be very welcome to join us. That's for the Spirits book. So with that said, I'd like to sign off now and thank you all for your patience. And I hope to see you all again at the center soon in person. Take care now. Bye-bye.